All right. Yes. You guys do some homework? How was it? It's good?
It's working good.
It's working. That's good. That's fine. How about you guys? Just try the homework? Okay. That's good.
Every test case, I expected the driver factor.
Yeah. Test case, you extend driver factory. Page objects, you extend the base page. It's simple. And then on the test classes, you create page objects that you need to work with. Right? Those three things you really need to remember. All right? Any questions? You had a question?
Well, can you go over it?
One more time? Yeah. We're going to go over it one more time.
I have questions too. I don't get the landing page why you wrote by private by email by.
Okay, we're going to do one more walkthrough. How about we start with, like, for instance, like base page, and tell me what you don't understand about base page, right? Right, and
On the last where we check the messenger and we need to find the link where it says he has the correct email or phone
Yeah.
number. I have no idea how to do it here because none of my works with this.
okay, that's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll fix that stuff. So we have this base page. Who did not understand what base page is? So are we all good with base page? Alright. So base page is simply actions or functionalities that is very common for all pages. Right? So think of things like click, send keys, or get tags. These are very common things. It's kind of page independent, right? Another reason we have to do this here because first of all we're not repeating this get driver, find element, and all of this over and over. Only thing we are going to, if you want to click on something, all you're doing is passing the element and you're done with it, right? And then this method kind of takes care of itself. So that's kind of the whole point of to centralize this. So now base page, then we have things like landing page, right? Who does not understand the page object models? Why do we create a landing page? Can someone explain why did we create a landing page? So
That is the locators. So in Facebook we have someone like login, email, password. We put something here. So there's something locators like for email, for password, for login, and some methods. Because these variables are private, so we need some methods to introduce.
that's okay, right? But I need to get a little bit more understanding of what that is. You want to try, Suhail?
If we need to put like email, so we need to go over again. So we are not going to over again, but we are reading with the locators and we can call it by element and change element by element.
See, you guys are explaining me what it does, right? Which I understand that. Why do we create page objects, right? So that's part of your explanation is correct. Part of your explanation is correct. But I need to really understand, Vishal. Like, why did we create these page objects?
To have a simplified code, to have a clear code, easily better than.
Yeah, but that's not so. There's no content to your explanations, right? Oh, simplified, nice, great. This doesn't tell me what it is, right? I'm still missing the explanation, Mohammed.
This is part of our framework of our check-shop to testing our web page. We can create whatever locator we needed in this page, whatever login, password, emails, gender, male, female, whatever you want for testing. And we can add some method help us and to do what is to save our time and also do the best for our testing. So more clarified.
Okay, so this is a little better, right?
Yeah.
This is better. If somebody else wants to try it too.
It's okay.
You're not convincing me. If I was in an interview, I would not hire you guys, right? So I need to understand. I want to hear something that okay, no, this is correct. Go ahead, yeah.
Or dynamic. No, because
Again, these words don't really tells me anything. More dynamic, more cleaner, more nicer. Who cares about these words, right? That's doesn't add value. You need to give me content. Like, why do we create page object? What is the best benefit of it?
It's a better design.
Keep giving me the same
we
things,
say
right?
part of our framework.
Everything is part of the framework,
Yeah,
right?
we need it.
XML is a part of the framework. We understand that this is part of the framework, right?
What you want?
That's what I want to see exactly.
All people say everything.
Right? All right. So the whole main purpose is that every page, right? We talked about this. If there is a front end page, web page, every page has to be represented by a page object from your framework level,
Yeah.
right? Guys, let's listen. Otherwise, we're not gonna understand this thing. So for every web page, we have to have a representation of that as a page object on your code base, right? These page objects contains three different things. You have the locators, which are your private field values, and then your constructors if you have one. We don't have it in our case. And then you have your behaviors, a method that performs actions, right? You can kind of simplify it that way, right? The reason we do this, we can keep it organized so that if tomorrow something changes, let's say this locator value changes or they get rid of email and password, right? Maybe they have an auto login now, right? So if any future changes within that web page, we just have to make a change on our page objects, right? So we can keep it centralized, right? And it's easier to obviously maintain. So first you have to give a content of what you're trying to say, and then you can use certain words to kind of say, okay, no, this is easier to maintain. But if you just say as your first sentence, oh, page objects because it's easier to maintain, it doesn't give me enough context to what you're trying to say. Does that make sense, Vishal? So yes, you guys are correct with some of the wording, but you have to give me a little bit of a background of what is page objects and why do we use it, right?
The major of this.
Right. So this is where we store at a field level we store our locators, and at a method level we perform our actions. Right. So if you wanted to enter email or password and things like that, you'll create a method for it and you'll pass in the locator. So tomorrow, if you have to write a logic around your email, how you enter email, right? Maybe you want to check another value is enabled or disabled, and then you enter an email. I don't know, right? You can write this logic within that, and whoever sets an email, let's say in your test case, you don't have to do this, right? All you care about is setting an email. Going back to the analogy of remote control, like you don't care, how this button is built. All you care is that if I press this, it will turn the TV off, right? So same thing with your methods should be so independent is that if I call set password, all I have to is actually passing the password. I don't have to worry about how they created the password because you're always going to work with other teams' code base, right? I mean, you're not going to be the only one working on the team. So you might have 5 automation engineers, for instance, and everyone's going to work on different modules, right? So you can't learn the entire app. That's crazy. So you're going to be responsible for a very small part of the app. And if you don't understand how everything works, then it becomes a little complicated for you to work, right?
Is the recording on?
Yes, it is recording. So does that make sense a little bit more now? So every day we're gonna do this exercise. What is a page object? Until everyone gets it, we are doing this, right? Because this is what you have to explain. I promise you that, right? You have to, you have to explain what a base page does and what a page object does and all of that, right? So it's just easier. Like I said, I want you guys to just do one interview or two interview. So far, 4 candidates did single interview and they all got a job. So I'm kind of gonna be in that streak too. Everyone that kind of goes for it, and the main reason is this framework. You have to, if you explain it, then you convince them that you can work. That's all that. Like, how do you convert a string to an int? You can figure that stuff out. People know these things. But if you don't understand the framework and you go start writing stuff in weird places, you're wasting a lot of people's time. Does that make sense? And now, if you go into a workplace and their frameworks might be slightly different, but 60 to 80% is going to be same, right? So once they know that, okay, this person knows how to work within the boundary of what needs to be done, right? So then, they're convinced that, you're disciplined enough to work in another framework. So that's what you're trying to convince in an interview. It's nothing more than that, right? So I just want to kind of re-emphasize and try to practice this at home when you're home. Try to explain base page to yourself. Try to explain page objects, the driver factory layer. Write it down if you have to, because that's the story you have to tell. Because your question is going to be guarantee you is going to be, can you walk me through your framework? That's it. Like you can't just say, oh, it was this page up. Like it has to make sense what you're saying. There has to be a flow, like a workflow to your explanation, right? So you can either start from driver factory layer or you can start from base page layer, and you can work yourself away. You can talk about base page, you can talk about page objects, talk about your test layer, and then talk about your driver factory layer. I mean, we're gonna add cucumber layer, which is later, but that's the easier part, right? Everybody have a little bit of an understanding here now?
Why the by?
Correct, right? So the by is a data type, right? So there's two different data types. So you have by and element, right? So the reason we do by is that so that you see how we are using ID, right? We can also use tomorrow. Let's say ID is not working. You have to use something called XPath. You can use that. Like the data type doesn't change, right? We are not saying web element type XPath or web element type ID. Otherwise, you have to write so much of coding and it's hard to maintain. So we're kind of saying like, okay, hey, long as it's any type of web element, right? Either represented by ID, XPath, or name, whatever may be the case, you can update it at one level and you don't have to change anything on your code base, right? So one of the example I was giving is that think of XPath, name, IDs are like type of animals, like dog, cat, right? Elephants. And by is like an animal object. I mean, I don't know if that analogy kind of works. So we're just saying as long as you kind of give me any type of animal, I'm okay with that, right? We can get into like more specific, like you might see, if you might go into a place where they have written a framework at an XPath level or ID level, but that's fine, you can understand that. But I think this is more efficient because it's less maintenance and as far as...
One more thing, you wrote this just as a landing page. So is that in the framework when you are working? Is that how you define it or?
This?
Yeah.
If I'm writing a Java framework, nothing crazy. This is how I do it for people. So it's most recently I've been doing a lot of JavaScript, but mostly if I like all of the Java framework that's written, this is simple. That's how it is. Like if you see a framework that is very complex, it's been written by a very horrible engineer. I promise you that, right? If you see a very clean framework, the person who wrote it is very well thought out, right? So that's pretty much how I do it. 2 layers, right? You got the base page, and then you have the page objects, and then you have your factory and your test. That's it. I mean, you can't get any more difficult than that. I mean, easier than that. I mean, Deepak knows about horrible framework where he works. So you can ask him how complicated is that. He's not a mean person. But any questions on that? Guys, I really emphasize, like, we have a break coming up. Take some time off and just to try to understand the framework. Draw it for yourself. Write about it. Because you can explain this, your chances of getting a job is really high, right?
can explain it, then we will get them.
Well, it's not that simple, right? I'm just trying to kind of, make sense out of this. Like, this is a very important part, right? You have to explain this, and you still have to do more work. But if you can, see, it's all about going to the next step, right? If they ask you about the framework and you can't explain anything, chances are the interview is not gonna go farther, right? But if you explain this, at least you go to the next step, and whatever the next step is, I don't know that, right? But at least you know you're moving, you're moving along, so to speak.
You said buy the data like what other data is there?
Well, by is one. I mean, we don't want to memorize all of them, right? So far we ran into web element was one of the data types, right? And then by is another data types. But you guys should automatically know what these are, right? Landing page is a data type. Base page is a data type, right? Every class is a form of a data type. So I make sure that you understand that part. That it doesn't matter what these names are. That could be anything, right? But as long as you know that this is what represents right after your access modifier, whatever the value is, that's the data type. That's how you have to think, right? It's not like, okay, by is the data. By is something that I could have been created, right? It doesn't have to come from Selenium, so to speak. You had a question?
So how about data types, integers, strings?
Though, yes.
So they're-
Scanner is a data type. Remember we did the scanner? Customer was a data type. Account was a data type. What are all these data type is? What type of data type are those?
Non-primitive.
Okay, it's only two types. So if you guys keep guessing this, then I'm probably gonna get it right, right? Raise your hand. What type of data type this is? What kind of? Okay, what kind of data type is this?
Non-primitive.
All right. So it's a reference data type, right? There has to be a reference point. The ones you mentioned, like integer, boolean, these are primitive data type. They come from the language itself. The reference ones that comes from the API that's been built by somebody else, right? So anything that is not primitive, I mean, that's pretty much not primitive, right? I mean, no one's gonna ask you that in an interview question. I promise you that, right? Because that's very childish. All right, any other layer that you don't understand? I mean, we have the test layer. This is where you just pretty much write your test. This is nothing really crazy, right? And then the driver factory, it's been almost 2 days we've been going over this, right? This is kind of a setup, or you kind of like all the driver related core functionality that you want to perform by default, right? You can kind of put it here, like before class, after class.
So on the public class, you see the private static website. So is that okay if I write instead of private, I write public?
I mean, what is the purpose to write public? It has to be a reason, right? You don't just decide to write something public or private. There is a reason I did this in private. What is your reason to do this in public?
No, I know the private because you're trying to keep it safe and so that it doesn't have access to. I mean, I know the purpose of writing private. In case if I made a mistake or
No, but why would you want to do public? If you made a mistake, you want to fix it and do it private, right? No, I kind of understand. I'm not trying to put you in a spot. There has to you have to ask yourself questions. Why am I doing this thing, right? Just because I could do this in so many different ways, but just because you can do it doesn't mean you do it, right? So you want to do it the safest way possible, right? So you're learning. We talked about it. Field variables should be private. That was something we established a few months ago. I mean, last month, right? So it has to be a reason for a public. You have to give me a justification for that, right? You can just say, oh, I made a mistake. Then that's a mistake. You should go back and fix it. All right? Whatever you want to do, it has to make sense. Otherwise, you're not going to be a good engineer.
I have one question. What's the difference driver.quit and driver.close?
We're not there yet, but driver.close closes a single browser. Quit, let's say if you open 3-4 windows, it will tear down all of them, right? All right, so that's what the driver factory job is. Today we're going to shift our focus away from a framework a little bit, just kind of understand how many different locators type we did. I mean, we did ID, right? You guys seen XPath, CSS. What are those things? Let's talk about those for like next, I guess, 40 minutes, right? And then after that, after the break, we'll go over how to handle drop down and stuff, and then you will have some challenging tests to deal with drop downs. All right. So this class, think of like it's outside the framework, right? It's not. It's really just kind of want to work with. I'll just extend the driver factory just because I want to maybe use the URL. Um, all right, so there are about like 7 or 8 different ways we can locate elements, right? So for instance, you have Facebook, and these are all web elements, right, that we're dealing with. So if you wanted to inspect something, you will just go right click, hit an inspect, and then this window pops up, and it kind of tells us, some details or attributes about the element, right? And you find the unique attribute that you can use to access that web element, right? So far, we've been just using something called ID, but like I said, a lot of time ID is not going to be available for you, right? So you may have to figure out other ways to find those elements, right? Um, so one of the ones that like I said, we've already kind of did this. So get driver dot find element by dot ID dot email, right? And then we'll just do a click. It doesn't matter, right? So this is how we find it by ID. There's another options that we can use. It's called get driver that find element by that ID equals to name. Right. So you can also use something called name. Name is not very common, right? I barely see this. But like I said, Facebook is a pretty standardized company, so they're you see all these are very clean. So this is well written, right? But and they also gave actual test ID, so you can also there's like a good um, companies or good programming practice teams. They know that we need to deal with these elements, so they uniquely identify these out for us as well. So um, if you look at Facebook, they already did one called data dash test ID. So we can also find it using by that, right? But we'll go over that a little later because we don't have this option available, right? There's no such a thing as by dot data equals to test ID. So there's other ways to access those, the ones that are not available for us, right? But to access elements attribute, by default we have about 5 or 6 or 7, but then there's other ones that we can customly access them. All right, so if his ID is available, you always want to use an ID. If ID is there's multiple multiple elements with the same ID, then we have to figure out other ways to do it. But we're not there yet. If there is a name available, we can look what I did here. Right? So you want to do that. Then there is another options that we can use. Well, here's an interesting one. Get driver dot find element by dot tag name, which is, let's say, input dot click. So let me ask you guys this. So we can also, so these are called tags and these are called attributes for the tags, right? What I'm trying to do now is that I'm using the tag name options to find an element. And I'm saying, hey, go find me, hey driver, go find me an element with tag name input, right? But it's pretty confusing. It's like I'm saying, hey, Mohammed, go to this classroom and find me students, right? Well, all of you guys are students. I'm not really, because it doesn't know. So I can go here and grab a random student from there. Does that make sense? So you think of an input, it's kind of dumb the same way, right? I'm saying, hey, go find me input. Like it doesn't know which one to find, right? It might find the email, it might find this, it might find that field. They're all input, right? So we don't use tag naming that way, right? Now you may have a scenario where I say, hey, I need to find out list of input fields on that page, right? Then we can deal with input, right? But for now, for a single usage, you don't want to use a tag name for it, right? You always want to find an attribute that makes that tag unique, right? Or that element unique.
So we have sometimes for one page we have a different attributes like ID, name. Can we like combine ID and name to make to pinpoint
We can.
exactly?
Yeah, we're not there yet, but you'll have a lot of opportunity to do that, and you'll hate it. So, but for now, just trying to understand what these things are. What he's talking about is something called custom XPath. So because these are all same, we have to maybe combine few, or we may have to write something, right? So there's a lot of ways to do that. It's actually pretty.
Well, this is the messenger page of Facebook. I know that I ideally something changed.
Mhm.
So I was wondering.
I want that was by design. I wanted to face that stuff a little bit, right? So
ID is not always
no, it's not always reliable, right? So then at that point we need to pinpoint an actual locations, right? So we have to write some stuff, write some code, right? So that's something you're gonna study over the weekend about how custom XPath works, all right? But these are all valid scenarios that you guys run into. Everyone who was not able to complete the messenger scenario, that's totally fine, right? Because you're not able to find the locators because there's no ID, right? So now we learn this, you go back, and maybe you can figure this out a little bit easier, right? All right. So where was I? So you don't want to use tag name because tag name is very common, right? So tag names are the first, I guess, the value that right after the angle bracket that starts, right? So input would be a tag name, T body would be a tag name, table would be a tag name, right? So there's so much, right? So you have there's so many inputs, and some are hidden, some are not visible for a different reason, right? So, but that's there could be fields that are, but you see how many inputs out there? It's just not convenient for you to use tag name that way. So we won't be using that, but I'll show you where we will use it a little later. Then you've already seen this one, find element by dot link text. All right, so let's say forgot account. All right, dot click. So if you look at your link text here, right? If you wanted to access a link, link usually doesn't have an ID, right? But you can, I mean, link means they must have a text, right? That's how, so Selenium was kind of reverse engineer how the web page is built, right? So it's nothing really complex. If you ever build a web page in the past, right? That's how we build them. So they're kind of looking into how web page is built, and that's how Selenium was kind of formed, right? So if you look at, we'll inspect this, right? There's no ID here, but what we have is a text, right? So Selenium has a built-in functionality called forgot account ? Dot click, and you can use the link text too, but it has to be exact text, right? The reason I mentioned this because there's another weird one. I honestly never use this, but I don't like using this one. I mean, why do we want to use partial? It makes a little bit more. I mean, how long is your link? That means you need to truncate your link, right? That's the bigger problem that you have. So we want to make sure that we're not using this one a lot, but there's an option for partial link usage. All right. So you don't have to give, I guess, the full name. You can just give part of the name. All right. Then there is one called by.xpath, right? And what are XPath and things like that. So you're going to have some readings over the weekend about XPath. So don't stress too much about what it is. Once you read about it, you come to the next class, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. What I want to talk about XPath in a different way is that when you think of Earth, right, and there are certain locations we can access. Think of, and how do we access this location by? We can use XY coordinate, right? That means it's always going to be a new, that's like this spot that I'm standing on was kind of air. So it's okay. Let's not get into technical. Whatever you're standing on, that XY coordinate is never going to be duplicated, right? Whatever that XY coordinate is. But if you were to remember every XY coordinate of all of your friends' houses and this and that, you just can't do it, right? So we did what? We make it into country, and then we made it into cities, and then we also radius them by zip code just to identify a specific location in a very easier form, right? And then finally, you locate a house by a number if it's in building. It could be a building number, and then a floor number, then an apartment number, right? So we were smart enough to figure that piece out. Well, think of an element the same way, right? If we don't give them a name, how can we deal with them, right? So we have to somehow figure it out. So sometimes you have to give more of like think of this as a country, right? So you can think of this page as Earth, so to speak, right? And then this could be a country, and then within the country might have a city and so forth and whatnot, right? So how do we write this out, right? And this is what called XPath, right? It stands for some XML stuff, right? But what we're saying is that XPath is something that you can uniquely identify. So you have to write that navigation, right? So let's say if you don't have an ID of an element, right? What we can do is we have to write a custom XPath, or we use this tool called cronpath, whatever, that can create a one for us, right? Most of the time the one that creates it is good, but there are going to be unique scenarios where it doesn't know how to figure it out either. You have to customly write, and that's what you're going to study over the weekend, right? But most importantly, what I want you to understand is the concept. It doesn't matter. You will figure out a way to find an element, because if you don't find an element, you can move forward. So you're gonna be forced to find an element, right? So I'm not worried about that part. As long as you understand what you're doing fundamentally, that's what's very important, right? So if we were to find an XPath for first name, first obviously we do inspect, right? And there are two types of XPath. There's absolute XPath and relative XPath. So we're not going to deal with absolute. I mean, absolute is like pretty much start from, like, let's think of like a world level, right? So the very first thing we say country, city, zip code, this, that, right? But what we're saying is the relative is like, hey, find a unique zip code and then look for a house. So we can kind of save a lot of search time, because if the zip code changes or the house changes or whatever may be the case, then this entire XPath, if anything changes within that entire workflow, everything is going to break, right? So just want to kind of show you, look at how the absolute XPath looks like, right? So you have HTML1, body1, go to the div3, div4. So let's say tomorrow they add something new here, your code is not going to work anymore because the entire path is going to be incorrect now. Does that make sense? All right. Now, what we really have to do is, you see how this relative XPath looks like? It's telling you, hey, go find me an input with ID u_0_c. Make sense? Right. Now, in this case, because we have a unique ID, it was able to figure this out, right? But we can use this. But if it has an ID, you might want to just use ID. You don't want to use XPath because it's slower. And then you just use the ID. Now, when you go to an interview, and they might say, hey, what's your preference of which locator would you like to, do you like using it? And you might say, well, XPath is pretty easy because you hit it and it creates it for you, but it's actually slower, right? I mean, we can't really see it with our eyes, but if you're running thousands of tests, I can slow it down. So because ID is very unique, so when your Java code, let's assume, goes to the web page, it just looks for that ID. It doesn't have to look for anything else. Does that make sense? But when you think of XPath, first it has to look for an input, all the inputs with the ID, whatever that ID is. So you kind of first you have to create a list, and then under the hood there's a lot of computations going on when you're doing an XPath. So you might not want to use XPath as your first option, but a lot of times this is your only option. So in those cases is fine. So you might want to answer in a way that, hey, XPath is not my first option. I usually go with ID or whatever, but if I have no other option and XPath is the only way to go, then I have to go with this. Now you may ask another question is that, okay, well, let's assume nothing is working. ID is not working. I mean, there's no ID, XPath is not working, and I'm not able to make it work. Well, then you have to speak to the dev team, right? What you have to do is you have to speak to the dev team and say, hey, I'm trying to access this first name, but I'm just not able to access it, right? I tried all these options. Right? You don't want to go and right away and say, hey, I need you to do this for me. You can say, hey, I tried these 5 different ways of locating this element. I'm just not able to get to it. Can you slap in a unique ID for me here? And they'll be hopefully kind enough to do it for you, right? Because if you can't do this, you can't sign up, right? So they will understand that. Or you might want to take it to your manager or whatever, and whatever the chain of command is, you want to kind of get that through. So dev team has the capability to add unique elements for you, right? Or sometimes they're using a framework that automatically slaps stuff into locators, right? Like a default locator, so to speak. So if you don't speak out and writing this complex XPath, that's not good coding either, right? As soon as you see the XPath is getting very complicated, stop for a second. Talk to the dev team and get that fixed, right? But when you work here as my final project, you're going to deal with a lot of complex XPath because I want you to learn it in the hardest way so that when you go to work, it's just very easy, all right? Any questions? So there's another one called CSS selectors, right? CSS selector is similar to XPath, but XPath relies on, so what you're seeing here, let's check this out, page source. Whatever you're seeing here, right, so to speak, it's this HTML, right? This HTML is what is being represented here in a UI form, right? So they had to write all this garbage to make this page looks like this. Does that make sense? So XPath uses that, right? And this is called DOM, right? It's called DOM structure. So it kind of navigates through this DOM and try to locate, make the element unique for you, right? CSS works the same way, but CSS is more of a style and design for the app, right? But let's say you have this sign up button. We may have a unique CSS object for sign up button, or we want this sign up to be a button to be have specific font, like the New Roman or something, or I want it to be specific font size. I want the background color to be green, right? I want this, button to be rectangle, whatever the pixels that they want, right? So all this information needs to be stored into a specific object called sign up, like a CSS, so to speak. So um, we can also use that if that's unique. And in fact, CSS is faster than um, XPath. Okay, so you might want to first try out CSS if it works. So it should be ID. ID doesn't work, try CSS. If it doesn't work, try last thing is the XPath. And then XPath is also annoying to write. So let's go into inspect. All right, and then you see how selector options here. Actually, right here there's the CSS one. So if you select CSS, and it's pretty simple, right? So there is sort of an ID, so to speak, in the backend. Whoever designed this, there is something called hash email, and that stores everything related to email. How big the email text field should be, and what should be the font, and all of those different things. Make sense? All right. So XPath uses the HTML DOM architecture, and the CSS uses the design layout, so to speak. All right. But like I say, you're going to be using XPath the most because a lot of the complex applications, they can, because most of the application you're going to work is, it's going to be very complex, right? So think of something like I say, hotels.com, right? I really like this site. Like this is a very complex one, in my opinion, because things are always changing. Um, I mean, just look at this page, right? For you to, I mean, you probably need like 5 or 6 automation engineers to just work on this, right? Because it's not, I mean, they probably has hundreds of developers on this side, right? Just that page could be a team, to be honest with you. Just this page itself it's a product management team. There's a designers, there's engineers, there's QA, right? Um, but imagine pages like this. It's very hard to give ID to every single elements. Like you know, if you're a front end developer, you'll quit your job, right? So what you have to do is they will use cards. They might give ID to this specific card, right? And then you have to somehow get to the card, and then get let's say if you need to get to this value 6.3 miles, right? You will somehow navigate through that. I mean, there's a lot of cool scenarios your guys gonna automate at some point. Is let's say someone searches by distance, right? So let's say I want to be around Boston University, right? So you search by Boston University, and you want to make sure all these distance are less than a mile. Let's say that's the logic that we've written in the backend, right? So first you have to search by, and you have to go to each card, and you have to make sure that each card values are less than 1, right? So these are the kind of stuff that's where you actually add value to the companies, right? This is not easy to test manually, but just working on this could be a team itself. So I don't want you to think you're gonna go into some company and you're gonna work on the entire application. That's crazy, right? You're gonna be your entire team. This could be like 30 people working on this page, because this page is just a representation of a very complex algorithm, right? So this is just something user interacts with, but that's not where the code is written. It's written in the server side of the API layer, right? So when you think of pages like this, it's just it's just very hard to find an ID for every single little thing, right? The reason why I choose Facebook homepage, so it's easier to kind of teach, but when you actually do the work, you're gonna do in this. It's kind of like training, right? If you're a basketball player, you don't play full game speed at training, right? You just kind of go easy. But when a game time shows up, you really, it's really more difficult than actual training. So I want to make sure that you understand the theory and the fundamental part of it. And then as you keep practicing, you're gonna get, pretty good understanding of these things. All right. So there is a really good usage of tag name that I really like. So let's say if you need to get all the links from the web page. So get list of all links, and then if whenever a link equals to forget password, that's when I want to click on it, right? So I want to get list all the links from the web page, and then click on specific one, or maybe click on each one of those and make sure all these links are clickable, right? Maybe something like that you want to write, right? So if you want to do something like this, we have to use a list object, okay? And the type would be, not WebDriver, web elements, okay? So list is, well, you remember array list is derived from list. So we're going to use a list here, but the data type is going to be web element, not string, okay? So we are dealing with a bunch of web elements here, and then we'll say links, and here you'll say get driver. You see, there's a difference between, I've been using find element, right? The singular one. So the find element returns me single web element. Make sense? So I say go find me an element and then perform action on it. Now what I'm saying is that, hey, go into a web page and give me a list of all of these web elements, right? So we're going to be using the plural one. If you go to an interview and they ask you the difference between web element and web elements, that means you got this job. I mean, that must be a very easy place, right? And then what we want to say, now you can get all the input fields. Make sense? But we're not going to get the field, we're going to get a link. So we'll just use a tag. So what a tag does is all the links has to have a tag call. You can't create a link without an a tag, right? So you have an a anchor right here. So that's how we can use this. And then what we're saying is that, well, now you have to iterate through the loop, right? Iterate through the list, and then whenever a value equals to the link that you're looking for, then you want to click on it, right? That's the goal. So we'll write for each loop here for web element, and we'll say link, and we pass in what? The array, right? That we just formed. And then we go through each one. So what happens is now we are iterating through each value. Remember for each loop, for enhanced loop? I mean, we forgot or something. So now, if link dot get text that equals to forgot account you want to just kind of do link dot click, and then you break out the loop, right? So this is when tag name comes very handy, right? Because you might want to get all the tags, or sometime you may have It might not be tag name. It could be an ID. Maybe you have a bunch of ID with name A, and you want to get all of them into a list and then do some work there. What's up?
This sort of would you give it in static base page or in
Like this logic?
yeah.
It depends. I think every time you're dealing with find element, most likely is going to be base page, right? So in this case, this is a good question. So what you will do is you'll pass in a by, and then you'll pass in a value you're looking for, right? So that those are the two parameters going to be in your base page, and then every time I say, oh, find element from a list, well, give me the the tag name, and give me the value that you're trying to click on, right? So, but now these are the part, like I'm doing like kind of like a rough note. What you guys are going to have to do is take these and put it in a base page, create a method for it, and go from there, all right? Any questions so far? You can also do this. Let's say if you want to click on the very first link on the web page, right? So you don't know which one's the very first link, right? So what you do is you put them into a list and then you index them through. So you can say links dot get, and it's telling me the index, and the very first index would be your very first link. So that's how you can also index them through links. So sometimes, like I said, you may have 3 or 4 elements that doesn't have anything to hook on, only has a tag. You have to have a tag, right? And then you can put them into a list and just kind of, 0 would be first name, 1 would be last name, and email and phone number. You have to get a little bit creative now. You can only teach so much here with this kind of stuff. You have to practice. Otherwise, it's just not going to work because that's the only way you can learn that stuff. Only practice. All right. Any questions so far? Let's do another exercise. So if you look at, when you look at web page, right, we've already know how to do a lot of things actually. We know how to click, we know how to send keys, right? We know how to read text, like get text. We also, what else? We know how to do Boolean actions, like is it displayed, is it selected, right? So, you kind of cover like 80% of it, right? There's not much you can do in a web page if you really think about it. There's probably like 8 things you can do, right? Click, send data, drag and drop, hover over, autocomplete. Like we're gonna do all of those options, but it's not much. That's not what you really have to worry about. Everything goes back to Java, right? You still have to write logics to get to that mile that I mentioned, right? How do I get there? So you have to what you really have to be good at is the locator strategy and your Java logic, right? And then everything else is going to be memorized after 1 week. So what I need to do now is, let's say you need to select a birthday, right? So this is called drop down, obviously, and then you want to kind of go into a drop down and select month on your birthday, right? So how do we deal with drop down? Well, the good thing is Selenium has some stuff built in. So drop down again, these are all web elements. We talked about it, right? So what we're gonna say is web element called month equals to get driver dot find element and by dot month. So I think it's month, right? So let's say you inspect And yes, so you see how the ID equals to month, and the tag is what? Select. If you expand this tag, you get to see all the options that are available here. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to select, right? So Selenium has something specific for drop down. If the drop down built with select, sometimes these days, because there's a lot of different framework, they may not build a drop down with select tag. So since they're using a select tag here, as soon as if you select, you can use a built-in object from you see how it says or OpenQA Selenium. So we can use a built-in. So now dropdown equals to new select, and it expects a web element, right, as a constructor value. So remember how we build a constructor? So it's saying month. You pass in a month. So this will make kind of like mimic, reverse engineer that entire list. So however they built it, now we kind of reverse engineered it and stored all of the value options in our drop down variable. Make sense? So now what we can do is we can say, hey, let's say if you want to select by text, right? So visible text is obviously the display text, the text that you get to read, right? If you want to select by this option, which should be your first option anyway, you can just say, sorry, drop down dot select by visible text. And so let's say Jan, right? And then, so there's a new thing I'm just going to introduce. It's called thread.sleep. You can pause your script right after, during execution. You can pause your script for X amount of seconds, right? And it comes in milliseconds. So let's just wait for 2 seconds. And that, what type of exception is this? It's a runtime exception. Compile time, right? So runtime is when we run it and you run into it, right? This is compile time. All right, you guys are good. And then I'm just going to throw it because we're really not doing much here. So now if we run this, let's see what happens. It should select January and then wait for 2 seconds and then stop your test. Right? Select January and then it's done with it. Are we good? All right. So you can also select drop down dot select by index. So you can also select by, let's say, index or whatnot and so forth. There's another one called drop down select by value. The value and visible text can be confusing. Value is like whenever they build this drop down, they have to give some sort of default value to it, right? And once they do that, you can also use that. You can kind of tap into that and use it. It's very rare that you have to use this, so I wouldn't stress too much about this. But if you have to, you have an option. So there's 3 different ways so far you can select an elements from an array. I mean from a drop down. Okay. And one more thing, you can also get all of the options. So let's say you want to get all of these selected options like value into one list, right? So just like how we got all of the links into one array, because the test scenario is this. I want to find out if Jan is part of the drop-down list, right? Because you could run into a drop-down that is 300 fields, right? And you want to find out, each values are there. So what you have to do is you have to write a loop, an array through it. But before you get there, you have to store all of those values into an array. So I'm going to do the first part, and you're going to do the second part for me, right? So the first part is list web element I can comment this out. List web element month options equals to let's enable this so we can use this code again. We can say drop down dot get options. What this does is this stores all the values that we have here. January, February, March, every single value is now available in this list, month options. So what I want you to do for test is this. You have to write a loop. I want you to find out if check if Jan is part of the list. All right. So let's do this one first, and I guess for those of you who's fasting. All right, let's do the first one. I'll create a local variable here. So we want to find out if Jen is part of the list. If not, we'll probably fail the test case, right? So we'll say boolean is found equals to false, right? So if it's found, we'll turn this into true, okay? So we'll say for web element, and let's say option equals to month options. We could just actually call it month. Okay, I already have month somewhere. Okay. We'll say if option dot get text equals to then what we're going to do is part of list, right? And then we will switch it to true, okay? Because now, since it's found in the list, right, we can turn that switch to true, and then you kind of want to be out of the loop, right? And then I know this wasn't kind of asked for, but I wanted to show you guys something new. So that logic will pretty much handle this, and it's fine. But if you have to, let's say if it's not found, you have to fail this test case, right? Because if it's, right now if it's not found, it's not gonna do anything, right? So we have to fail it. That's why I had to put this switch here. So what do we know about the assert library? What does assert does? It does some sort of comparison, validations, and things like that. And so far, we only learn about assert equal, right? So there's not. I don't like to teach in a way like, okay, one day we just spend all day on learning assert, right? It's not, in my opinion, it's not the right theory of learning it if you don't know how to apply it, right? If you don't know where to apply it, it's just like it's like going into Selenium library and learning everything there, right? It's not gonna be effective. So as we run into new scenarios, new actions, and that's that way we can handle it. So we'll say if is found, if is not found actually, if is not found, we can do something really cool. We can say, what? I hate when this happens.
Recording.
Yes, it's recording. We can say assert dot fail, right? And it's an overloaded method, so we can use fail with string, right? So this is an over. So a lot of the concepts about Java that we learn, you may not use it every day. I mean, you may not write it every day, but you're always going to be using it, right? So you most likely will use it more than you write it. So here we just use the overloaded methods, and we can give a message. When you fail this, what do you want to show? So we're saying one is not found. So now if I run this test case, what do I expect to see? Okay, so let's run this test and see what happens. You can already kind of see, you can kind of already quantify how important is test automation is. Imagine like if you have 300 fields and you have to verify manually, I think it's just a torture in my opinion. So, because Gen is part of the list, right? But if we do something like this, like whatever, right? And now if we run this, it should fail the test case because if we don't explicitly fail it, it's just going to pass it for us, right? Because there's no logic to tell the compiler that, hey, this is fail. So assert.fail deliberately fails the test case. You see what it's saying? So you say, hey, there's an assertion error, month is not found. So now this is a valid test case. So if something is not found, it will fail it. Make sense? All right. The second one, I thought she did a good job on this one. So this is Irina's code for task 2. So obviously we're storing the month options, and then we're getting the instance of the calendar, and then we're getting the new simple date format, which is this is the format that would give us the first 3 digits, right? It's called short form of month, right? And then you format that with the current time, right? So get time will give the current date, right? And then pretty much iterate through each one of those value, and then if month options and get text, and you didn't have to probably do this here again, Arena. So this is probably not needed here. So you can kind of just compare it with the format with the current time, and then the format would be January, and then month option dot click and break out of it, right? So that's one of the way. But if you've done it with date, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as you format it with 3M. That's kind of what I'm looking for. All right. I mean, we kind of started with Selenium, how do you guys feel about this? Is it a little bit fun now, or?
It's a great. There are too many things happening. There are 10 screens open.
Yeah, that's work. It's not super easy, but it's also not super complex. But well, you don't want that to be super easy, right? Then your job is not secure. So it's gonna require you to think for a while and work on it. But like I said, there's a lot of opportunities out there. Um, we already had a bunch of students that's got a job who's not even finished your job program, right? And they just did single interviews, not even multiple interviews, and it is most of the credit to them because they're able to kind of study, practice, and so it's easier to kind of go into the interview and kind of just explain yourself. But any questions? I can take any questions if you have about anything. I know we haven't done these sessions for a while. It could be about anything. So I mean, class related, obviously. Bobby?
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So, going back to the base page class. So the reason that you chose not to extend the driver factory is because it happens to be in the same class. You can easily import the driver factory or get driver. Because I tried like base page extends driver factory, and it
No, we
pretty much
don't want to
gives
do that, right? Because that's not the goal for this. Yes, I mean, that's like going against the rule of the framework because this one is meant for classes. So base page doesn't really perform any actions. I mean, it doesn't really get executed by itself. It only gets executed through test, actually through page objects. So the whole idea is not to extend this in base page. That's kind of the rule. Think of this as a rule. Should be only get because this is only during the test time I need to deal with this stuff. Because if you do it in before class and all of that, it's really not doing anything. If you take it to base page, it's really not going to instantiate any other stuff. Only way this gets instantiated if you get what is a test. If it's part of a test, that's the only time this entire driver will get instantiated. So you could extend it there, but your driver is not going to be live. Make sense?
yeah. I mean, I ran it, but like you said, yeah, it didn't really.
Yeah, it's going to say null point exception or some crap like that. All right. Any other questions from here? What do you guys think? The class is going too fast or too slow? Is this the right? So we have about like a week off now, right? So if you're behind, I suggest whatever part you're struggling with, Deepak's gonna be here on Saturday. So I'm assuming a lot of people not gonna be here Saturday, so you might have more dedicated time to work with Asan and Deepak, and ask any questions. It could be going back to loops or arrays or whatever, right? Whatever your weakness, you know it best, right? And don't kind of walk away from that. Address those issues and if you can improve. For those of you who's doing really well, you can take time off, I guess. But we're kind of the midway, well, maybe a little bit more than the midway. But I would like to get the Selenium done, and then we got to learn how to do REST APIs, the backend side of things, right? Actual testing, the API modules, and all of that stuff, right? So when you look at something like hotels.com or Facebook and things like that, like remember we talked about this is kind of a representation layer, right? Presentation layer. This is not the actual logic is not written within the page. So what we eventually have to do is learn how to test the backend services that fetching all this logic, all this data, and everything. All right. So we need to get to that point, but we have a lot of work ahead. But once you kind of get a little bit understanding of this, it should be fine. Any questions? All right. Let's do one more classwork. Well, this could be homework, but you'll have a homework as well. All right, so okay, guys, let's focus. All right, let's do this one, and then I'll assign you the homework. Right. So this one, I want you to find out if, and I don't want you to use hash set and all that stuff from Google. Right. I want you to find out if duplicate the drop down contains a duplicate value. This is a very valid test scenario. So like let's say you have a drop down, you don't want January to be twice, right? Or February to be twice. So multiple times. So make sure that your drop down doesn't contain any duplicate value. And if there is a duplicate value, right, print them out. You can test it out with like some custom. You can create an array for yourself. So this is a good test exercise, right? So you can also do some sort of things like, I don't know, string duplicate equals to, right? You can say something like Jan so this could be your test code. Like see, if you run this, your test should fail and gives you January as the duplicate value, right? So this could be, so you can write a array like this to test your. Be creative about this, right? So you need to test your code. So write some sort of a dummy array to test this out. But I just want to find out if month dropdown contains duplicate value. That's all. So what I want you to do is sign up form should not accept any invalid email address. So these are valid test cases. So I'm not just kind of doing any type of garbage stuff, right? So these are a little bit of easier test cases, but still these are test cases that you have to test. So I guess this is what I want you to do. Enter first name, right? Enter last name, and then what I want you to do is enter an invalid email address, right? So let's say plain text. So that's what? That's an invalid email address. And then I just want you to click on new password. So when you click on this field should be highlighted in red with a warning icon, right? So you click on the warning icon, and I want you to verify this error message.
How verify?
Huh?
How we can verify this message?
Well that's
No, because it's nothing.
well, you don't know that yet. Okay? So play with this, find the XPath, right? Figure it out. So this is gonna give you a little bit of a pain. I just want you to understand that. But you gotta figure it out, you gotta work on it, see if you can fight through it, and then submit the homework or come Saturday, work on it. But now here's the catch, right? So that's the scenario. But this is not the only invalid email address. Does that make sense? There are so many different variations. So I listed all of them here. So these are all possible, and maybe even more out there that are invalid email address. I want you to test it for all possible options. So you might want to put it in some sort of a loop, create a loop of all the invalid error message, and go through it, and each time make sure the error message is displayed. Okay? Are we good? That's gonna be, half of the work I did it already, so I'll walk you through it. So that's the most difficult one. But find this locator as well. So if you inspect, how can you say it's not there, right? So it's there. You got to use the cron path. You know, you got to figure this up. So it's there. Um, don't try to solve the problem by just when someone's explaining. You got to work on it. You got to try it, right? So, any questions on the scenario?
It's going to be a part of our existing framework, right?
You're gonna write. That's a good question. You're going to continue to write scenarios on your existing framework. So you should have base page. You should have a. I mean, you don't have to create any new page, because everything is within the landing page, right? You're just going to create new locators for first name, last name, email, and the new password, and a bunch of other locators, like everything that you need to deal with. I don't know if you need to create anything at a base page level, right? Because I also don't see any new functionalities coming, right? I just want you to see if you can kind of complete the scenario. Also, complete the other one for duplicate, right? So there's 2 homeworks that you have. Next Thursday, we will have the quiz. Not quiz, no, it's not quiz, it's midterm, right? I think he's very interested in that. So she asked me a few times. So we are going to get our midterm, you know, on Thursday. And it's going to be 2 Selenium questions and 1 Java questions.
Okay, Mohammed, I have a question.
Yeah?
Last time on the messenger, somehow I ran into some problem. I couldn't validate the messenger on the messenger for indirect emails.
Okay.
Monday is off.
Oh, we don't have class on Monday. So that's just to reiterate.